Okay. So this is all about exception handling, and what is this exception handling all about? Okay. So before even looking at any other topics in exceptions, what exception is all about? Like, okay, so you assume like reading a file in the Java code, right? So you give the location of the file and read the file, right? Fine. Or if you want to actually connect to say Yahoo Mail or something, or connect to a database and get the data. Right? So this is all normal flow of action. Like everything goes well. Otherwise, like you should be like defensive in your coding. Like, okay, fine, I'm connecting to the database, getting the data. Good. What if the connection parameters I gave are incorrect? That means the database that I'm trying to connect to does not exist. You should be able to handle those. And also, okay, if you are actually transferring a file, FTPing a file, you're connecting to the destination server, you're giving a port and host address and everything. And what if it fails to establish the connection? Okay, it is a peer-to-peer, it is a transfer, right? Source and destination should connect, they should open a socket, and the destination should be able to receive data from source. So all this are like normal course of actions. When everything goes well, we're good. If something is incorrect, Java provided an inbuilt framework called exception handling framework, wherein you can specify, oh, if it doesn't exist, throw this exception. So there are like standard exceptions that they provided, and you can also write your own exception. Okay? Say for example, you're writing an employee class, okay, and I'm trying to create employee, and say for example, I ended up creating two Ravis with the same employee ID. Then system has to throw an error saying like, oh, employee so employee one already exists, so I cannot create a same employee number. Use it, try re-entering the data or something like that. So it should alert the system, right? Like the system should alert. Say for example, if you are trying to create a username and password, and there are a bunch of systems that doesn't let you create a password which is like less than 8 characters, or it should have a uppercase character and all that. So these are like though these are implemented on the UI validations, these can be implemented on the server also. Say for example, UI forgot to implement, server should be so robust that it is handling all the rules that UI is also putting on. Okay, so that means, okay, so we see, okay, there is no special character, we throw an exception, oh, without special character we don't let you create a password at all, something like that. Okay, so I'm just trying to give you some background so you can then deal with the topics within exception handling. Okay, so these can be actually errors or exceptions, but let's see what exception is all about and what error is all about. Like generally only exceptions we handle, errors we don't handle. Errors occur, we let them occur. Okay, exception means, okay, we assume it is going to be there but it is not there. Error, we don't even know it can occur. Okay, we got to be very clear on this. Exception we try to handle, but error we let it happen because we don't even know that it is going to occur. Okay, fine, let's move on. So with this background, exceptions. The exception class defines mild error conditions that your program encounters. Okay, just plain English. Okay. Exceptions can occur when the file you try to open does not exist. Okay. So if a file you are trying to open does not exist, the network connection is disrupted. Okay. So in a Java program, okay, first thing when there is an error in production, first thing the developers try to look at is logs, where, okay, that can tell them something, oh, system is not behaving properly, so there are some exceptions happening. Then we try to analyze what are those exceptions, why do they occur, oh, something is down, all that stuff. Okay, then the network connection is disrupted, operands being manipulated are out of prescribed ranges. Say for example, we saw int yeah, all these data types, right? Int, long, float, double, and all that. Okay. So during runtime, that means during the execution of the program, say for example, just give me a second. Sorry, sorry to interrupt. Uh, okay, I'm back. So while you are executing this program, int, double, float, long, and all these, they may go out of range, out, that means out of bounds, out of boundary. Or other day you guys saw like array went out of bounds. That means we declared an array as a size 4 and it went out of bound, it went up to 5. That's when it threw an exception, right? Array index out of bound exception. That means we don't know while we are compiling the code, we got to know only while we ran that code, right? So this is called operands being manipulated or out of the prescribed ranges. Okay. Then the class file you are interested in loading is missing. That means you are trying to run a class. We saw that exception, I think, right? No class definition found or something like that, or class not found exception. So these are the things that can happen. An error class defines serious error conditions. So we don't handle errors, I told you, right? So in the exception handling framework, there is an exception class and also error class. Okay. Exception class, we try any class that extends exception, we try to handle those. Okay. But again, there is a various categories, but for now, between exception and error, remember that exception is what you handle in the code. Error, you don't know that it's going to occur, and we treat it as serious error and we try to debug it later. Okay. But exception, you try to handle within code. I'm stressing it multiple times, so please remember it. Okay. Common exceptions that we need to know are like, or you will be aware once you start coding more, is arithmetic exception. Okay? That is when you try to divide by 0, or when you are trying to do infinity by infinity. These are not good even in math, right? So the same thing, how Java programs throw it as arithmetic exceptions. And null pointer exception is most famous exception, which is one of the runtime exceptions. When you do not instantiate an object, or when you are expecting an object to have value and it doesn't exist, you got to be defensive on not equal to null. Okay. Otherwise, it's going to throw a null pointer exception. And negative array size exception. That means size of an array, should always be positive, but it ended up giving you a negative size. Well, maybe programming error, right? Then array index out of bounds. We saw this in our previous sessions. Security exception, like something serious happened and we threw some like security exception. Then the handle or declare rule. Like from the beginning of the class, I was talking about we handle it, right? How are we going to handle it? Okay. So let's see how exception handling is going to occur. Okay. um, so the handle or declare, handle the exception by using try, catch, or finally. Okay. That means in every program we have something called try, there is a block called catch, and there is a clause called like throws. We say either declaring an exception, or we say like try catch. Okay, before talking too much, let me show an actually um, show an example, so probably that's when you guys will be really comfortable. Okay, so let's see, like how do we handle exception. This is the code. Okay, so what are we doing here? We have a class public static void main. This is where the program's execution start. And when we say handling an exception, either we declare try catch block here, and we also saw a keyword, another block in the slides, right? Called finally. Okay, so either we handle it like this: try, catch, and finally. That means our program execution code will be in try, and exception handling code will be in finally, catch, or finally. Okay, and it can be in catch and finally. I'll talk about individual blocks in a second, but okay, your application logic will be part of try, and exception handling code is part of either catch or finally. Okay, so that means we are trying to do this. If it fails, catch it here, and so you throw a meaningful exception. Say for example, our program threw something like runtime exception, say some runtime exception, and we don't really know, okay, how to display to the user. We display it in a user friendly format, right? So I cannot show a user saying like, this is throwing array index out of bound. Array index out of bound made sense to you guys because you guys know Java, right? But if it is to the user, we got to be actually displaying something meaningful. I'm not saying like we are going to catch array index out of bound, but we catch it as like an exception and put it in some meaningful way. Okay, so something like that. Not no, I just gave an example about array index out of bound, but it can be something else like file not found, right? So we filter out everything that specific to Java is showing up, and we throw it as a meaningful error, so UI can display good messaging out of it. Okay, so something like this. So exception handling, we either do declare like this: we put the application logic in try, and you put the exception handling logic in catch, and we put the catch and finally, or catch or finally, and let's delve deeper into those blocks. Okay, but just remember these three, right? So all it is trying to do is it is trying to read some system.in, meaning when I enter something on the console, it tries to read the data from there, and it tries to print whatever string that I input. But if it fails to read anything, then it is going to throw this error, or this exception. Sorry, I should be really discreet in specifying error and exception. Okay. So are you guys clear about what an error is and what an exception is so far? Any questions? Oh, I cannot hear you guys, but you can type in if you have any questions. Okay. Okay, so Rini and Soumya, I just saw you guys join just now after I started. But all I was talking about is what's the difference between an exception and an error, and why do we deal with an exception? Okay, Soumya, to catch you up, exception we throw. Why we need an exception is because we try to do something, and say for example it's not possible to do it. We try to throw an exception saying, oh, I cannot do this. Maybe this is because you cannot connect to the server. Say for example you're trying to connect to Gmail. Say you were not able to connect to internet properly, and you're trying to connect to Gmail. Your program may say like, oh, I cannot connect to the Gmail, so try again later, right? So if you are trying to do it in a Java program to connect to your mail server, it has to throw an error like, oh, I cannot connect. So that's when you will know, you will check your internet and all that stuff, right? So your program should be able to handle defensively any errors, any known things that can happen. Like when everything going good, you need not put any try catch. But if something goes wrong, your program will fail. While failing, also we fail discreetly. That means we know that it may fail because of this error, and that's why we are throwing that exception. Okay, something like that. That's the defensive check. Okay, cool. if you guys don't have any more questions, I can move a little forward and explain what are individual the blocks. Okay, what are these individual blocks? So we saw how to handle exceptions. Like if you go back to this slide, the handle or declare rule. That means either you declare a try, catch, finally block in to handle an exception, or you just declare that it is going to throw an exception and you don't even try to handle it. Okay. So how exceptions are handled in Java? Either you handle it by declaring try, catch, or finally, or you just say like, okay, this particular method throws an exception or something like that, but whoever is invoking that exception, that method should be able to handle it. Okay, when I'm talking about, oh, why are there 10 attendees though? Okay, that's fine, that's not a concern. That's okay. So here, this is how the other way to deal with an exception. Let's see here. Okay, so other way to deal with an exception here is public static void main throws IO exception. That means you don't have a try, catch, and finally block, but you're saying like throws IO exception. That means whenever it throws an exception, like it cannot read something, this method is going to fail, and whoever is the invoker of this method, that means internally class loader calls something, loads this class and executes, tries to invoke main method, right? That particular method should be able to handle an IO exception. Okay, that's fine. But so what we are saying is either you handle it here or you tell it can throw this exception. So somebody, whoever is actually invoking this method, will know that okay, IO exception is going to happen. Or let me put it this way. See here. If I don't put anything, it is going to complain unhandled exception type. That means either you declare it, see here, it is suggesting also add a throws declaration or surround with try or catch. So that means to handle an exception, either you declare it, add to throws. If I say add to throws, it's going to add it here. Okay, it's going to add it here. And when I invoke this method in here, okay, when I invoke this method in here without having this throws class, again I'll get that error because it said throws meaning we are telling the compiler, okay, this exception can happen, but here if you see here, we are not handling it. That means when it throws error, it comes in here. So nobody, there is no throws clause here. So compiler thinks, okay, it has to be handled here and it is not handled here, right? I can put something like this, and that error will go away. So because it is handled here, okay, we handled here. In this method, we handled by declaring a throws clause, and in this we are handling here like this. Or you could have just put throws. Okay, somebody else will be handling all those exceptions. If you just add throws, okay. Not only here, if you see any method in Java API, the first day I introduced to Java APIs, right? Okay. So you look at any method, so the package that we are on in general is what? java.lang.package, right? So go here and you look at any class that has like system.out.println, I suppose. Yeah. System.out, we say out, right? So select that out, which is a static variable, right? Okay. Println. Okay. So these are the method descriptions and what these methods does and all that, right? And also see here throws. See here we say like suppose system.out.printf. If we say it shows like illegal it can throw illegal format exception. That means they are specifying it already. If you don't give a proper format that it can understand, like nobody is stopping us to pass illegal arguments, right? Everything is an object, so we can pass illegal objects like nulls or whatever, and it can throw an exception like illegal format exception or a null pointer exception. Okay, so something like that. So nobody is stopping us to pass invalid data, but our methods that we are coding should be able to handle these invalid data. That is what that is called exception handling. Okay, any questions so far? Feel free to ask. And throws is a keyword. People ask it really in like if you know fundamentals or not, if you're applying as a fresher or something like that. Okay. Any questions, or we can move forward? Are you guys with me? Actually, I unmuted. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah.
Okay. Soumya, are you okay? Okay, let's move on. Hmm. Okay. Try and catch statements. Try code that might throw a particular exception. You put it here. Catch the exception. Code to execute if an exception of this type is thrown. So, this particular example brings in an interesting thought about how. So this exception is also a class. Okay, this exception is also a class in Java. If you see here, this is also a class. Everything is class or an interface, right? Ultimately, everything is a class or an interface. Fine. Let's see. Let's see an example. This guy is talking about exception, check run exception. Okay, so let's see here. What is this? So okay, see here. This particular code can throw a number format exception, or it can throw an arithmetic exception, or it can throw an exception. Do you see that? Okay, that means anything more specific. Okay, anything more specific. What is specific? Means anything that is a subclass of exception, you got to specify in the top. Anything that's a superclass like of number formats, I suppose, that has to be after that exception. That means think about it like inheritance. Okay, so we are talking about say engineering in general. If it is engineering in general, that's a superclass. And if I'm talking about mechanical engineering in specific, then I'm talking about mechanical engineering class extending engineering. It extends engineering, and it has special behaviors about mechanical engineering. I can have an electrical engineering class which extends engineering as well, but I have special behavior specific to electrical engineering, right? So that means generalization is called, if I were to talk about it, you in general, I can say like, oh, he's an engineer. But if I want to talk about a specific person like Ravi Nukala, he is like, okay, mechanical engineer, something like that. Okay, so that means I am talking about his skill set in specific, and within mechanical engineering, I can talk about various streams within that. Okay, so that's like even more giving more specific information, right? So this is called generalization and specialization. Okay, in the last class where we talk about UML, Unified Modeling Language, we talk about these uh, clearly. But for you to understand what is generalization, generalization is nothing but superclass. Specialization is nothing but subclass. So when I'm talking about here in this scenario, catch, this is more specific and this is more generic. If I don't know, if my code doesn't throw um, number format exception or arithmetic exception, it is handled by this guy exception, because it is parent class of all other exceptions. Okay, so any other exception that happens, I can catch it here. Okay, so this guy is like a parent of everyone, and whom this guy extends, throwable. Okay, so when somebody asks you what is the root class of this exception framework, that is throwable is the root class, and exception is the class that extends throwable. Okay, and error is a class that extends throwable as well. Are you getting my point? Okay, see here, these are the classes that extend throwable. Okay, that means both errors and exceptions, like can you see my screen? Like both errors and exceptions extend this guy throwable. That means Java provided us this exception handling framework by giving a root class called throwable, and throwable is the one extended by both exception and error. And error stream we don't handle at all. We don't try to handle it. We let it throw. Okay, we let it throw because that is really unforeseen. We don't even know whether those errors can happen. Those are like serious errors, like a system crashed or JVM crashed. Those are the errors. Okay, error, out of memory error. That means your memory is not sufficient. These are the errors. We let them happen. We don't code for handling those. Only exceptions are the ones we try to handle. And what is an exception? Any class, any 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 class that extends exception is called an exception, if you want to talk about in terms of code. But in general, what is an exception? If something unforeseen behavior happens and your code should be defensive to check those unforeseen behavior, is called exception. Okay, fine. Unforeseen situation just for your logic, not for not in general use case. Unforeseen in your logic will be when you're reading a file, that file does not exist, or when you're opening a file, you cannot open a file because you don't have a you don't have permissions to open it, or when you're trying to write a file, you don't have permissions to write to that particular folder because you don't have right permissions to it. Okay, something like that. All these are called exceptions. You should be able to handle those. Okay, fine. Let's move on. Fine. Let's see individually. Like I said, exceptions can be one second. Sorry, exceptions can be handled like this, or like I said, either you can use try, catch, and or finally. That means you could have just said like this as well. See here, even if you put a finally, compiler will not say anything to you. Okay, fine. So try is where all your logic will be, catch is where all your exception handling logic will be, and finally is where you put little more details. Okay, and remember one thing, this is like a golden rule in exceptions. Okay, what is it? You catch, that means you are catching only arithmetic exception. If your code doesn't throw arithmetic exception, you're not handling it. And you should be able to handle those, either adding one more catch block that says exception, or finally, like within finally also you can add your exception logic. But remember one thing, whether an exception if this code executes properly, catch will not be executed because there is no exception. Whether an exception occurred or not, finally will always run. Okay, finally will always run whether my code through an exception or not, finally will always execute. You have to remember this. Okay, whether an exception happened or not, catch will not execute if exception did not happen, but finally will always execute. Let me run this example. If you see this method here, main method, we are declaring a equal to 0, b equal to 1, and c equal to 0. What c says here? B by a. What is b? 1. A is 0. So anything divided by 0 is what? Infinity, right? So it throws a arithmetic exception. So it threw an arithmetic exception. We are saying handling it. Okay, fine. So so in this case, it will not even go in here, right? Because we did not throw arithmetic exception again. We handled it here. Okay, we handled it here. It will not go here, but this will execute. Okay. Enough of my speaking. Let me try executing this. Okay. Let's see here. See here. If you see, can you see the execution here? It said handling one. That means when it threw an exception, it came in here. Handling one, it said. Then in finally block, in finally block, in final block, in final block. It printed out thrice, and it said exception in thread main, number format exception for input string 32. Okay, that means I handled only arithmetic exception, but it also threw some other exception, like it executed this, right? Okay, let me format this properly. Okay, so now here is the code. See, it executed this, we handled the exception, then it came in here, it tried to read something which is incorrect, right? There is a space after that. So that's why when I'm trying to convert a string to an integer, which is invalid string, it threw an exception called number format exception. And I did not handle that number format exception, right? I did not say anything like number format exception. So it threw an exception. This guy threw an exception, and it executed all the finally and then printed out the exception that it happened. So what I'm trying to say is, whether exception happens or not, finally will always be executed, and then it throws any other exception that it did not handle. You just saw that, right? So if I put something like this here, so we want to know what kind of exception it is. So exception has methods like, okay, this is the kind of exception that is being thrown. Okay, this is the kind of exception that's been thrown. See here. See, so that means handling one, which is expected. Then in the second one, handling the exception for, see, handling the exception, it said g dot get message said for input string. But we want to know what kind of exception it is being handling, right? So you want to see cause of exception, or you want to print stack trace. I'll show that method in a minute. So it said exception, handling the exception null. Okay, but let's see here. It need not be part of system.println. It actually prints onto the console. See here. So handling one, then it threw this. It can, because we put a catch, it threw the exception, and then we are executing the finally. Okay. So if there is a catch executes before finally, but finally will definitely run. That's the point I'm going to make. Any questions? Is any questions? You can speak up. Yeah. Any questions, or are you guys comfortable?
Ravi, I just want to know about the security exception you just mentioned.
Yeah. In the slide.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the question?
What is the use of security exception when it is used to throw? When will we use that?
Generally, in terms of like if you are using the Java or security APIs, like you're not able to encrypt something, or you're not able to decrypt something. There, this package, like if you go back and I must have put it like in general, but if you go to this, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you go to these guys like security auth exception, let me see. That is the package I was like cryptogram. There is a package called Java dot crypt something crypto. Mm, here are crypto spec. Let's see here. It can be a custom exception also that I just want to put. It need not be a standard exception. Let me see more in here. Yeah, okay. Security dot spec. Let's see if it is really there. Like you can have your custom exception also, like security exception. Um, Let me actually search for all the classes here. If it doesn't find it here, we'll put it in code and see. Right? Mm, security. Yeah. So this is generally a runtime exception, and when we are actually constructing this guy, let's see who is like when you're not able to decrypt something, or like a security manager violation, like you put in an invalid values and you're trying to decrypt something, or you have a key, like that key it is not matching to the standards. Like I have a private key, you have public and private key, right? In that
Yeah.
you try to decrypt, you are like you try to encrypt using your private key and send it to the receiver, and they try to decrypt it. So anything that happens, like something is malformed, or some programming error happened while dispatching the code, we try to handle it using a security exception.
No.
So yeah, security manager indicates something wrong happened. Like it may not be like some intruder in between can actually change the, yeah, like the target that it is trying to decrypt to may not be may not be conforming to the standards of the specification. That's when we throw this exception, thrown by the security manager to indicate a security violation happened. Let's see whoever are the direct here. So this is exception thrown by the access. This is all in SSL and all that implementations. What we do is, say for example, you have a principal, like you defined a principal who should have authorization. Okay, who should have authorization, but somebody came in who did not have specific authorization to access this particular resource. We throw this security exception.
Okay.
It's a runtime exception. Basically, it can happen during runtime, but we just declare it. Or it can happen during your coding execution also, like runtime executions all happen during execution, not during compilation. um, Let me actually show if there is any example that can be used. So all I'm trying to say is when you invoke decrypt method, let me go to that class, like decrypt certificate. Let's see. So all I'm trying to do is try to decrypt a file. Let me show a sample in my project, one of the projects. Just hold on a second. Fine. I could not find a sample that I thought I had, but let me see where else I can show this example. Mm, okay, security exception details, right? Okay. So I can say like this. Say we are actually writing um, some security, some system that has LDAP or something, and we got a username that is not related to our LDAP system at all. Like I know Ravi Nukala is one of the users who can come in, and he has like a username and password, okay, defined. And if those username and password doesn't match, we can say like security extend. We can extend a exception that is of security, like say here. Okay. So that means I'm extending a security exception in here. Okay. And what are all the methods that I get? See here. Because I'm extending the security, let's see what are the methods that I get. Generate, override, or implement methods. So we don't get anything in specific from this guy. See here. We are getting only from object or this one. Okay. Go to security exception in here. And we get only security. Okay. Okay, this is just an exception class. Okay. So I use it here in one of these classes. Okay. Say I read some arguments, and if args of 0, that means I am passing only one argument, that length greater than 0. Yeah. Say if I'm reading two arguments, username, string, password. Okay. So that means otherwise it's a security violation exception for us. And what does this do? This is extending a security exception. Okay, so in general the security exception, we can see where all it is being used in Java as well. It's been used in so many places, but the things that we can be aware of is in IO, like can execute. See here, can execute method has like okay, it gets the security manager and it tries to check, okay, whether we have access to that file system or not. That's when it throws a security exception. Okay, so this is all related to permission. See here, when I'm trying to add something, I gave this example before. If you don't have permissions, we say like, oh, attempt to add a permission to a read-only permission collection. That means we are trying to add something where we don't have access to it. So this is where security exception is used, and how you can use it in your application in your own stuff. This is all general implementation in Java, right? All this is in the Java APIs, IO API. But if you want to do it to your system, like some application that you are writing, you can actually extend that guy and then throw this exception. Like, okay, so if username and password are not matching, then this is the problem. So you're going to throw an exception saying like, oh, security exception. Hmm? Oh, it is still executing the other one. Oh, what is this class called? Security, right? Why it is not showing it? Test security is not showing it. Why? Hmm. Okay, because I passed in the right values, it said successfully authenticated. And if I did not use it here, throws an exception. Security. Okay, so wherever you want to handle security related issues, you can extend the security exception. That's to answer you in short. That's the thing. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, any other questions, Rini? Do you have any questions? Okay, moving forward, let's see. Okay, specifying the exceptions thrown by a method. So how do you do that? Use a throws class. Okay. Remember that array index out of bound exception is a runtime exception. So you don't have to specify it in throws class, although you can. Okay. So you can specify it, nobody's stopping you, but these are not good things to be handled. Okay. Because these are runtime exceptions. Okay. Throw exception. I used throw here, right? Throw. That means we try to throw this exception explicitly. That means there is a difference between throws and throw. Throws is we are specifying that particular method throws here, right? We are specifying that particular method can throw this exception. But when you are saying throw, you are actually throwing that exception. That's the difference between throws and throw. Okay. Then this is the general hierarchy I was talking about, right? Throwable class. So object class, throwable is all, any class is a instance of an object, right? So throwable extends object, and then exception extends throwable, and array error also extends throwable. And again, in terms of exceptions, we have something called checked exceptions and runtime exceptions, or you can talk about compile time exceptions and runtime exceptions. Okay, so these runtime exceptions are now unchecked. That means we don't want to handle those. For those, it can happen during runtime, but we don't want to handle those runtime exceptions. That means null pointer exception, array index out of bound exception are all runtime exceptions. We don't want to say like try catch null pointer exception. We want to handle in the code like not equal to null and stuff like that, but we never say nah, catch null pointer. Okay, but exception, other exceptions like just like how we did security exception, like we extended a security exception for our application called Divan security exception, and we were throwing that exception, right? That is called checked exception. That means we specifically know what exception to be thrown. Or in my entire application, say my application is called loan management system, I can say like, okay, LMS exception. That means I am extending some exception class and considering uh, creating a subclass of called LMS exception, and within that I will throw that only if it is a checked exception. That means if it is like a security related issue, or if it is related to validations, UI validations like password does not exist, like a user does not exist, or duplicate user name we are trying to create, or password should be these many characters and it should have special characters and all that. So for those kind of stuff which are like business rules, we consider those as error messages to the user. Those exceptions are called checked exceptions. That means we throw that exception not to execute the further business logic, and somebody will handle it. So that means somebody will catch that exception and just display the message like get message. What is the message displays? Like oh, password incorrect, password is not conforming to the rules, or username incorrect, like you should have a this is the format that we support in our system. All those are called exceptions, and we throw those exception and try to handle those. That means we know the rules behind when to throw these kind of exception. But runtime exceptions, like anything like null pointer exception, array index out of bound, uh, no class definition found, all these are like runtime exceptions. We don't want to handle it. And famous interview question is, what is the difference between checked exception and unchecked exception? This is the difference. Unchecked exceptions are those which extend a runtime exception. Checked exceptions are those which extend exception directly, or any other subclass of exception directly, other than runtime exception. Making sense? This is a famous interview question, most probably asked interview question about exception framework. Okay, fine. Error. When a dynamic linking failure or some other hardware failure in the virtual machine occurs, that's called an error. Exception. Most programs throw and catch objects that derive from the exception class. Exceptions indicate that a problem occurred, but that the problem is not a serious systemic problem. It's just a programming problem or a validation problem, but not a system issue. When there is a system issue, that's when you throw errors. Sorry. Okay. Then runtime exception. Runtime exception class represents exception that occur within the Java virtual machine during runtime. Okay. So create your own exception. What can go wrong? Choose the exception type to throw. Okay, so my own exception I created, right? That the one security exception. Similarly, you can write your own exceptions as well. So exceptions come in two flavors: checked and unchecked exceptions. Okay, checked exceptions include all subtypes of exception, excluding classes that extend runtime exception. Checked exceptions are subject to the handle or declare rule. Any method that might throw a checked exception must either declare the exception using a throws clause, or handle the exception with an appropriate try catch on finally and or finally. Finally, you may specify or you may not specify. But if you specify whether an exception happens or not, finally will always execute. Remember that. Subtypes of error are runtime exception are checked exceptions. So the compiler does not enforce the, so for errors and runtime exceptions, compiler does not enforce the handle or declare rule. You are free to handle them or to declare them, but the compiler doesn't care one way or the other. Okay. So if you choose an optional finally block, it will always be invoked regardless of whether an exception in the corresponding try is thrown or not, and regardless of whether a thrown exception is caught or not. Okay. The only execution to the finally will always be called rule is that a finally will not be invoked if the JVM shuts down. That means in the catch, if you say system.exit, like how to shut down a JVM, like this. Okay, how to shut down a JVM when this error happened. Okay, so system.exit is when JVM will shut down. Okay, when you do that, finally will not execute. See, handling one and then this exception, like this one is printed out by this one, right? And then after that, you did not see any executions of finally, right? If I comment this guy out, it will show. Got it? When exactly finally will not execute? Only when system shutdown happens. Okay, fine. Uncaught exceptions propagate back through the call stack, starting from the method where the exception is thrown and ending with either the first method that has a corresponding catch for that exception type or JVM shutdown. So which happens if the exception gets to main and main is ducking the exception by declaring it. Okay. So this is what I'm talking about. Like, okay. So you throw this exception and somebody who is invoking main, if they are not handling it, it will propagate until the root of the method and JVM shuts down after that. That's when it will stop. Okay. You can create your own exceptions normally by extending a exception or one of its subtypes. So I extended a security exception, which is a subtype of exception. Okay, something like that. You can create your own exceptions. So all the catch blocks must be ordered from the most specific to most general. We discussed this, right? Then would be caught by a catch because a catch argument can catch the specified exception or any of its subtypes. So this guy is like super, right? Or you can say catch throwable, which are all bad practices. You don't even know what exception it is throwing, but you're just swallowing it, everything, right? That sucking up the entire exception stack. If you just put catch exception, that means you don't know which exception it is throwing. You just want to not to throw exception and you're handling it, and so generally catch exception and catch throwable are like probably bad practices, but it's okay if you want to just swallow the exception altogether. Okay, some exceptions are created by programmers, some by JVM and stuff like that. Fine, this is about exceptions, but I do want to talk about, this is all about Java 5 and Java 6 exceptions, but Java 7 brought in an interesting concept called try with resources. Okay, so try block, because right now I'm using only Java 6 as a compiler for this project probably. Let's see. Hmm, I'm using 7. Maybe Eclipse is not supporting that yet. Okay. Why would it not support? Do I have this compiler thing as confirming to 7? So let me create a project. While creating a project, maybe there is a No, I'm just trying to show you guys three more concepts uh, introduced by Java 7.0. That's try with resources. Okay, that means previously when we were reading files here, okay, when you are reading a file, um, what you got to do, like if you are doing a reading a file like this, let me put that example in here. I can talk about it in java.io as well. Let me just try to show you guys. These are just the new features that we want to explore. If I'm trying to read a file, okay, file name, say, suppose I don't have a file in here right now, but I can just put something like, I can give the path of the file, okay, some file I'm trying to read, okay, and then if that file does not exist, it may throw an IO exception. No? Okay, file does not do that, but file input stream or something, like I want to read the file or something. Like, we'll go deeper when we are actually dealing with IO package, but for now just see this input stream. Okay, so it is throwing something, unhandled exception. This is what we want. So try catch exception. Okay, so like this. But Java 7 introduced a feature called try with resources. Okay? Try with resources. Let me actually put it in here. Try with resources. Why my Eclipse is not showing up? But let me actually show the syntax to you guys exactly. Yeah, something like this. Try, okay, something like this. Do you see that? So I'm trying a resource, okay, something like this. Try with resource. That means I don't need to actually handle file not found and all. Even if I don't set this to null, like any other exception that can happen within the try block, even if I don't set it to null, it will release that resource. Like these all can cause memory leaks actually. Like reading a file without closing, like this is all expensive operations. Like IO operations are like really CPU intensive and memory intensive operations, okay, or when you're talking to database, these are all memory intensive operations, so are CPU intensive operations and expensive calls. If you talk about it in programming perspective, these are very expensive calls. So this guy, like this with a new try block, what they optimized it is, though I may forget to do is equals to null in my finally block. Previously, what I used to do is this is not there. This is not been supported. I had to definitely put a finally block. Okay, I had to definitely put a finally block and say is equals to null, or something like this. Like if that stream is still open, is dot close explicitly. Okay, again this may throw error, so I have to surround this also like this. So I had to do all this explicitly. But with this guy coming in, I need not put this block. All I can do is, okay, let me declare it with like this, test with resources, and that guy will take care of that finally block. Understood? This is new with Java 7.0. Got it? Are you following, guys? Speak up. Yeah. Okay. So this is one with Java 7.0, and other two I want to talk about are, this is called try with resources, right? And other one is, it will also support something like this. Let me actually show this one as well. While even I don't use this, but these are new features I want to share while we are discussing here. This is one other case like this. Let me see why it's okay. Exception here, and okay, and we try with resources, but here, okay. So it says catch these exceptions, and you got to specify something in here for both the exceptions. And what does it say? Is already caught by the alternative exception. Okay, so that means, see here, IO exception is already caught by this guy, so that's why it doesn't say don't yeah, it doesn't accept this one. Or if I say, as you guys asked before, if I say security exception, what does it say? Unable to reach block for IO exception. That means no code exists that needs IO exception. So let me put that code in here. Is equals to new file stream, file input stream. Like all these I'll talk about it shortly, but just see how these exceptions are coming in handy. Okay, see here. So now we have the, it can throw either IO exception, or if we don't have permissions to read that file, or some other thing like some other code that we have that can throw a security exception, then we can say system.out.println and caught exception. Okay, this is how we can print it. And you may ask, I had this question the moment I saw this feature. Even I had this question. Oh, okay, then isn't it like we are swallowing both IO exception and security exception together? Isn't it same as exception to exception? No, actually what it does is, this guy converts it to the desired exception that we, like a subclass. It will try to put the subclass, like it will say like IO exception dot like if it is IO exception, it just deals with IO exception message, and if it is security exception, it deals with it. Or if you want to specifically deal with um, if IO exception happens, you want to do something, then you want to say like IE instance of, this is always there, right? Instance of IO exception, then do something else. If instance is instance of security exception, then do something else. Like if you want to handle specifically um, related to that particular exception, then you can do all that. Okay. um, so this is one other feature like called this is one other feature called multi-catch. Okay, this is one other feature called multi-catch. So Java 7 introduced multi-catch, try with resources, and one more called rethrows. Okay, I wanted to share a link with you guys here. That's a good thing I thought before I was waiting for you guys to join. See here. So we know this, right? Like what it is doing is custom exceptions. It is extending a first exception. It is extending a second exception. Like two custom exceptions we created. A rethrow exception, that means I pass an exception name. This guy is throwing those exceptions, right? Just like how I did just now. But there is a concept called uh, pass the exception name, and it throws first exception, second exception. That means previously um, Java never allowed multiple exceptions in here. Okay, Java never allowed multiple exceptions in here. See here, these guys also are talking about it. However, in Java SE7, you can specify exception types, first exception and second exception in the throws clause. Okay, in rethrow exception, um, determines the exception thrown by the statement. What I'm trying to say here is, you can use this. You can use this, and you can say like, okay. So the examples try block could throw either the first exception or second exception. If you look at this code, we understood, okay, if exception name is first, it throws first exception. If exception name is second, it throws a second exception. Suppose you want to specify these exception types in throws clause of rethrow exception. That means there is a method that takes in the name of the exception, and you want to rethrow that exception. Based on the name of the exception, you are trying to throw either the first exception or the second exception, just like how I did, right? So in the prior releases to Java 7, SE7, you cannot do so because the exception parameter of catch class E is of type exception. That means you are putting in an exception which is a super class, right? And the catch blocks restores the exception parameter, and you can specify the exception type as exception. So the thing is, it is the super class, so you cannot explicitly throw which subclass exception it is throwing. Getting my point? Like, you, if you once you say catch exception, it used to be generic, very generic, right? But now, what you can do is you can say throws either the first exception or the second exception. Okay, that means when an exception happened, if you throw E, if first exception happens, it throws first. If second exception happens, it throws second. Prior to this, like, all we are trying to say is, prior to this, when you say throw E, it used to be just the exception. Like, whoever is the caller doesn't know whether the first exception happened or the second exception happened. Now they enhanced it such a way, if first one happens, you can specify it like first happens. Second happens, we can specify like second happened. Previously, we used to just say throws exception. Getting my point? Previously, we used to just say throws exception. Or I can just say exception and throw E. Okay. But this guy, now I can say, I know this will throw IO exception, right? I can say IO exception, right? Or security exception. Okay. Previously, they did not allow us to do this. If I were to put it in throws class, it has to be handled in here. Something like that. Make, is it making any sense to you? Any questions? So the three features we saw are like this. Try with resources. Next,
Catch with multiple exceptions.
Yeah, multiple exceptions, multiple catch exceptions, and this one is called rethrow exceptions. That's the name of the feature. Final rethrow or more precise rethrow. This is called final rethrow or more precise rethrow. Like this paradigm, even if you really ask me, I don't really adapt it. Doesn't matter. Like to me, I'm throwing those exceptions or not. But it is just a programming construct that they gave us. Like so, when you declare more one or say that again. Somebody has a question. One. When you declare one or more exception types in the catch class and rethrow the exception handled by this catch, the compiler verifies that the type of the rethrown exception meets the following conditions. The try block is able to throw it. There are no other preceding catch blocks that can handle it. It is a subtype or supertype of one of the catch class exception. So this step never it this step did not happen prior to Java 7. They started doing this step like it is a subtype or supertype of one of the catch uh, class exception parameters is done with this Java 7. Allows you to specify the exception types this in the throws class in the rethrow exception method declaration, because you can rethrow an exception that is a super type of any types of the declared in the throw class. Okay, that's fine. So I don't really, I'm not for it or against it, but you can just start adopting it, or you know the feature, like there is a feature that exists with this name. Okay, as and when I see more use in our further exception handling code, we can try adapting these methods. Okay, that's when you get more comfortable with this. Okay? So these are the three new features in exception framework. If somebody asks you a question, you should be able to answer these three. That's the reason I just mentioned. And there can be a question called what is chaining of exceptions. Okay, this is one other question asked, and we may think, oh, I don't know what the chaining of exception is. What is it meaning? Like you threw an exception in here, like say you did not handle it here, right? You did not handle it here. You just said like you throw an exception, but it the primary, like whoever is invoking this class should handle it. If they did not handle it, whoever is invoking that parent class should handle it, something like that. So this is called exception chaining. That means when you throw an exception in the subclass, if it is not been handled, it gets propagated until the place where it is being handled. That is called exception propagation or chained exceptions. Okay, uh, like if somebody asks you that question, don't get confused. It is just nothing but the behavior of exceptions. They are just explicitly calling it out as chained exceptions. Okay, any questions on any of the new features or any of the existing exception related stuff? Any questions so far? When do we use an exception? If you guys don't have a question, I'll ask the questions. When do you use an exception? When do you use an exception? One of you. You got to answer it. Otherwise, I'm not moving forward. I just want to make sure you guys are following it.
If you want normal flow of the code, if there is normal code, if you are expecting an exception there,
Mm-hmm. And when what is the difference between an exception and an error?
Exception we can expect it. Error we cannot say when it will throw.
Mhm. And what are checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions?
Checked exception we have to handle them or declare them, but unchecked exceptions, if we do not handle or declare, the compiler will not complain. The code will run.
Hmm. Okay, cool. And did you guys follow the new features? New features. Any questions on the new features?
The last one, it's a bit confusing.
Which one?
Why?
That rethrow thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, even rethrow thing. I did not this one appreciate it yet. The reason being, uh, previously when you said throws exception, like a try exception, here this is a feature, right? So you're
Yes.
using an exception name and you're saying like throws first exception and second exception. You're catching it. Okay.
Yeah.
So this code we used to do and we just did in our previous thing, right? Like multi catch also we did the same. But what
Yes.
this guy is saying is, so this example try block could throw either this first exception or second exception, which is fine. We know it totally. Suppose you want to specify the exception type in the throws clause. Like here, you're just when you say throw here, like if the exception name is not either one of these guys, okay. If the
Okay.
exception is not either one of these, you are saying like throws exception, okay.
Okay.
But the thing is, you want to explicitly say like these two exception types happen. You didn't want to write this boilerplate code like if exception name is first, throw first exception. If exception name is otherwise, you throw second exception. If you don't want to write this kind of boilerplate code, which we used to do before, he says start using something like this, some method like this, which will actually let you declare these subclasses of the exceptions, which is like a utility for me. It's not like a feature. You see what I'm saying? Like even we would have
Yeah.
done this before also. It's not a new feature. Like I could have done this like explicitly like this. But here what he's saying is okay. Then in that rethrow method, like entire this block, shift to rethrow method, then you know the exception name and you don't need to handle anything. You just catch the exception. That means you remove these two steps. Okay. You remove these two steps. So now this try
Okay.
block is blank. Okay.
Okay.
Remove these two steps and you shift this first exception to here and second exception to here. That's it. So you're not handling the others, these two steps. If the exception, if the exception is this, you're just throwing that exception. Like you're just saying catch, and this all these are extending exception. Like if you look at the top code, first exception is extending exception, second exception is extending exception. So you need not handle that code. Okay, you did not explicitly do a try catch, but you can just do throws first exception or second exception. Or if none of those, then it may throw that exception altogether a different one. But if it is an instance of one or these two, like it is just a boilerplate removal, in my opinion. That's why I did not appreciate it that much as well. But that's okay. Like they provided a feature.
Okay.
Yeah. But you understood what? Okay. Taking my opinion aside, but did you understand like what exactly they were trying to tell us? Like, see, I just it means this is handled, and we are just putting in throws IO exception and security exception. If you just look at this method, it doesn't make any sense, that new feature, right? But if I put it in try catch exception, instead of saying throw e, I'm going to write that method like this in here, rethrow exception. Okay. No, actually, I don't want to put this one. I want to put this. So this one, instead of saying this throws exception, I'll remove this boilerplate code and say e dot to string. No, e dot. What will I pass? Message cause get class. See, now do you see this? Now, if it throws a like because the instance of this will be IO, right? What the code that I have can throw what IO
iOS.
exception. So it goes in here. It it is trying to see. Okay, if I call this method, I did not put any code to handle that, right? Though I said
Yeah.
catch exception, it is actually saying it is looking at this throws clause. Okay, it is looking at this throws clause unhandled exception of type IO exception. So that means though we are saying catch exception, it's not catching that guy. Okay, though we are saying catch exception, it's not saying that. Previously, it would have been okay. It would have taken that name. Okay, let me see. If I don't even have this code, what does it do? It's the same. And throws exception. So add throws to the declaration. Okay. So though
If
I
we
have
remove throw in catch block.
this one,
Yeah.
even then it will throw because it is in the throws. All
Okay.
it is honoring is throws guy.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Then it will go away.
No.
Yeah. So the thing is, even I don't appreciate this. I like it's not making sense to me either. But the thing is, there is a feature like unhandled exception type. So we are passing an instance, and it goes to the exception name, and it's trying to like it automatically detected we are throwing an exception of type IO. That's just because of throws clause. Even prior to Java 1.7, it would have happened here. So add a throws in the declaration. If I just add a throw here, it is all fine. But what they are saying here is, let me make sure if I'm not missing anything in here. You can specify exceptions, first exception and second exceptions in the throws clause. Can determine that the exception thrown by the statement throw E must have come from try block, and only exceptions thrown by try block can be this or this. Even though the exception parameter of the catch E is type exception, the compiler can determine that it is an instance of first exception or a second exception. So that's the thing. Otherwise, prior to Java 1.6, we have this catch exception, right? This catch exception would have handled it. Like, even though this is redundant, right? If we have a catch exception, though you have this throws clause, it was redundant. But what they are trying to make sure is compiler wouldn't have thrown this error in Java 1.6, but in 1.7 it started throwing this because it can determine it is an exception of type IO. But to me, I think it can happen even prior as well. Let's see. Let's create a project with Java 1.6 as well. Okay. So
Okay.
I don't want to say create by 1.5. Let's see. test exception Java 6. Then probably we'll appreciate it more, little more. Alright, let's go in here. Alright, so let's take this. Okay. No, I won't put it here. What else? Let's put this method in here. Okay, so let's see. And what does it say? Here, unhandled type IO, even we got that before. But here it says unhandled type exception of type E. It means let's see the quick fix what it is doing in here. See, this is the thing. That's the difference, right? Um, okay, in the caller you will not see any difference, right?
Okay.
In the caller you will not see any difference, but here it is not letting us put it as IO exception. See, when I say throw, it is actually throwing an IO exception only, but here it says compiler does not know that. Compiler says unhandled exception of type exception.
Exception.
Okay, because you got to say throws that particular exception, right? Because it is throwing an exception of type exception. But whereas in Java 7.0, it's not complaining about that. That is what they are trying to make a point. Okay, see, it can automatically detect, this guy can automatically detect the instance types. Understood?
No. Yeah.
It can automatically detect the object type of it, and it lets us put it here. Then comma exception. Getting my point?
Yes.
So I think that's what they are bragging it as a new feature, but that's okay. Even without this, we can live. Okay, at least we know the difference now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? All I just did was just created a new project with new feature on Java 6. Okay, this was in Java 6 and this was in Java 7. Like you can do it yourself as well using this. Okay, fine. Any other questions? Clear on exceptions?
Yes.
Okay. And can we move to the new topic? Or okay, let's go back to Excel. So what is exceptions, various types of exceptions, why exception handling is required, how to throw exceptions in Java. This is very, very important. Like though you know these concepts, when you're actually implementing it, it makes really, really more sense. Okay. Are you guys in a position to take up collections today? Can I go forward with collections? I need yes from everybody, not just one person or two. Are you guys in a
Okay.
position to take collections as well today? That is more important than the no, Rini? Okay. You were interested in collections, right? Even before, yeah. You want to start it on day one, on a fresh day. Do you have any questions on so far, Rini, or you just wanted it to start on a fresh day?